The boundary of Korea is divided between North and South Korea. Well, to understand the context, we have to go back to 1910, when Korea was annexed by the Empire of Japan. As for the end of World War II, and after Japan surrenders, it is forced to lose Korea. The United States and Soviet Union agree on a provisional partition of Korea. The Union established a communist regime, and in the southern half, it established an anti-communist regime. This was meant because North Korea wanted to unite the peninsula under a communist regime by invading South Korea. With the help of the Soviet Union and the newly established Communist China, they launched their attack. South Korea was extremely close to being taken over, but with the help of the United States and the United Nations, they were able to take back most of the peninsula. After 3 years of fighting, a ceasefire left the peninsula divided in two. To this day, this border remains the exact same. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that red button.
The American Revolutionary War, also known as the American War of Independence, took place between 1775 and 1783, resulting in the 13 American colonies breaking away from British rule and forming the United States of America. The war began due to growing tensions between the colonies and the British government over issues such as taxation without representation, trade restrictions, and British military presence in the colonies. Events like the Stamp Act of 1765, the Boston Massacre in 1770, the Boston Tea Party in 1773 fueled resentment. The First Continental Congress met in 1774 to seek a peaceful resolution, but after British troops clashed with colonial militias at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, armed conflict became unavoidable. The war was rooted in the colony's desire for self-governance and economic freedom, while Britain aimed to maintain control over its empire. As the conflict escalated, the Continental Congress formed the Continental Army and appointed George Washington as its commander-in-chief. The Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson and adopted on July 4, 1776, formally announced the colony's right for Britain and articulated the belief in natural rights and popular sovereignty. The Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775 proved the determination of the colonial forces. In 1777, the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga was a turning point, convincing France to enter the war as an American ally. The harsh winter at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778 tested the resilience of Washington's troops, but also saw crucial training that strengthened the army. The war's final major engagement occurred, the Siege of Yorktown in 1781, where American and French forces surrounded British General Cornwallis, forcing his surrender. George Washington proved steady leadership, while figures like John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson were instrumental in both governance and diplomacy. This conflict resulted in the deaths of around 25,000 to 70,000 American patriots. The war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, in which Britain recognized American independence. The Revolutionary War not only established a new nation, but also inspired democratic movements worldwide. The War of 1812 was a military conflict between the United States and Great Britain that lasted from 1812 to 1815. The war began to several options from the American Revolutionary War, as well as new issues. The main problems were that the British were putting restrictions on American trade. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British forced American sailors into the Royal Navy, and the British gave support to Native American resistance against American expansion in the Northwest Territory. Many Americans, specifically the Warhawks in Congress, saw the war as an opportunity to defend national honor, secure maritime rights, and possibly expand U.S. territory into British Canada. The conflict began in June 1812, when the United States declared war on Britain. At the time, Britain was deeply involved in fighting Napoleon in Europe and gave limited attention to the war in North America. Much of the early fighting occurred along the U.S.-Canadian border, where the Americans launched several unsuccessful invasions. American naval forces won significant victories on the Great Lakes, such as Oliver Hazard Perry's triumph at the Battle of Lake Erie in 1813. Another key victory came in 1813 when American forces under William Henry Harrison defeated a British native alliance at the Battle of the Thames. The British launched a powerful counteroffensive in 1814 after Napoleon's defeat in Europe. They invaded the Chesapeake region, capturing Washington, D.C., and burning the White House and Capitol. However, the Americans defended Baltimore in the Battle of Fort McHenry, an event that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner. In the South, General Andrew Jackson became a national hero after the decisive victory over the British at the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, though the battle occurred after a peace treaty had already been signed. Despite being militarily inconclusive, the Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814, effectively ended the war by restoring pre-war boundaries without addressing all American grievances. While no clear victor emerged, the war fostered a strong sense of national identity in the United States. It confirmed American independence, weakened Native American resistance in the Northwest, and helped propel figures like Andrew Jackson into national prominence. The War of 1812 is often remembered as the Second War for Independence. The Mexican-American War was a conflict between the United States and Mexico that lasted from 1846 to 1848. It was primarily caused by the U.S. annexation of Texas in 1845, which Mexico still considered part of its territory despite the Texas Revolution nearly a decade earlier. Tensions escalated when President James K. Polk, an advocate of Manifest Destiny, the idea that Americans were destined to expand across the continent, sent troops under General Zachary Taylor into the disputed border region between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. In April 1846, a battle occurred between American and Mexican forces in the disputed zone, prompting the U.S. Congress to declare war. The war was driven by both political and territorial ambitions. The United States aimed to acquire California and other Mexican territories in the West. After early clashes in northern Mexico, American forces launched a series of successful campaigns. General Zachary Taylor led victories at the battles of Palo Alto, Resaca de la Palma, and especially the Battle of Buena Vista in 1847, where a smaller American force repelled a much larger Mexican army. Meanwhile, General Winfield Scott led a bold maritime assault at Veracruz, then marched inland and captured Mexico City after several key victories. The war ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. Under the treaty, Mexico recognized the Rio Grande as the southern border of Texas and ceded a vast amount of territory to the United States, including present-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of several other states. In return, the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million and assumed certain debts. The war significantly expanded U.S. territory, but also intensified sectional tensions over the expansion of slavery. The Mexican-American War thus played a key role in shaping the geography and politics of the United States in the years leading up to the Civil War. The American Civil War was a devastating conflict that took place from 1861 to 1865, fought between the United States, also known as the Union, and 11 southern states that seceded to form the Confederate States of America. The primary cause of the war was the long-standing debate over slavery, specifically its expansion into newly acquired western territories. Tensions between the North and South had grown over issues such as state rights, economic differences, and the future of slavery. The immediate spark came for the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, who opposed the spread of slavery. In response, southern states began to secede to South Carolina and began in April 1861 when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Civil War was defined by large-scale battles, massive casualties, and significant destruction. It featured both conventional warfare, with armies meeting in open fields, and elements of trench warfare and raids. Added the first one, the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history, the Battle of Gettysburg, and the Siege of Vicksburg. The Battle of Gettysburg resulted in a turning point in the war, called Confederate General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North. That same year, the Union gained full control of the Mississippi River, with the capture of Vicksburg effectively splitting the Confederacy. Important Union leaders included President Abraham Lincoln, who guided the nation through its greatest crisis and issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, declaring all slaves in Confederate territory to be free. Militarily, General Ulysses S. Grant rose to prominence with victories in the Western Theater, and eventually became a commander of all Union armies. The Civil War ended in April 1655 when General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The Union's victory preserved the United States as a single nation and led to the abolition of slavery with the passage of the 13th Amendment. The war resulted in over 600,000 deaths, making it the deadliest conflict in American history. It left deep scars on the country, but also paved the way for Reconstruction and the long, ongoing struggle for civil rights. The Indian Wars were a series of conflicts between the United States and various Native American tribes that took place over several centuries, but most significantly from the late 1700s through the late 1800s. These wars were rooted in the expansion of U.S. settlers into native lands, fueled by the belief in manifest destiny. As settlers pushed westward, they intruded on tribal territories, often breaking treaties, seizing land, and provoking resistance from native nations. The U.S. government frequently responded with military force to suppress native resistance and secure land for settlement, mining, and railroads. Early battles included conflicts in the Ohio Valley, such as the Northwest Indian War from 1785 to 1795. The wars intensified after the Civil War, specifically in the plains in the West. Important battles included the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, where U.S. troops killed over 150 Cheyenne and Arapaho people in Colorado, and the Fetterman Fight of 1866, where Lakota warriors ambushed and killed 81 U.S. soldiers in Wyoming. Important American figures in the Indian Wars included General William Tecumseh Sherman, who implemented harsh policies aimed at forcing native surrender, and General Philip Sheridan, who oversaw many campaigns in the plains. These leaders often destroyed villages and food supplies to weaken native resistance. The warfare ranged from conventional battles to ambushes and raids, with the U.S. Army frequently employing superior firepower and infrastructure to fight off native forces. It is estimated that tens of thousands of people died during the Indian Wars, including soldiers, settlers, and Native Americans. The outcome was a near total loss of native sovereignty, as most tribes were forcibly removed to reservations. The wars ended with the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890, where U.S. troops killed over 300 Lakota, including women and children, effectively crushing the last large-scale native resistance. The Indian Wars had a profound impact on American history, leading to the widespread displacement and cultural destruction of indigenous peoples across the United States. The Spanish-American War was a short but significant conflict between the United States and Spain that took place in 1898. The war began primarily over American support for the Cuban struggle for independence from Spanish colonial rule, as well as broader U.S. interests in the Caribbean and the Pacific. Tensions escalated after the mysterious explosion of Allied powers, including Britain, France, and Russia, against the Central Powers led by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. While the United States initially maintained neutrality, several factors drew the nation into the conflict, including Germany's restricted submarine warfare, which targeted American ships, and the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany the U.S. had remained officially neutral while providing material support to the Allies through programs like Lend-Lease. Once involved, the U.S. fought in two major theaters, the European theater against Germany and Italy, and the Pacific theater against Japan. The war was fought using a variety of warfare types, including trench warfare, maritime assaults, aerial bombings, and eventually atomic warfare. In Europe, the invasion of June 6, 1944, resulted in a turning point as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, France, leading to the liberation of Western Europe. In the Pacific, the Battle of Midway in 1942 and the island-hopping campaigns, including the battles at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, were crucial in pushing back Japanese forces. The war in the Pacific ended after the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Prominent American figures included General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who served as Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, General Douglas MacArthur, who led forces in the Pacific, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who guided the nation through most of the war until his death in April 1945. He was succeeded by Harry S. Truman, who authorized the use of atomic bombs. World War II resulted in an estimated 70 to 85 million deaths worldwide, with over 400,000 American military deaths. The war ended with the unconditional surrender of Germany in May 1945 and Japan in September 1945. The conflict drastically altered the global power structure, ushered in the Cold War, and solidified the United States as a leading world superpower. It also led to the creation of the United Nations in an effort to prevent future global conflicts. The Korean War was a conflict that occurred from June 25, 1950 to July 27, 1953, between North Korea and South Korea, with the United States and other United Nations members supporting South Korea. The war began when North Korean Communist forces, backed by the Soviet Union and later China, crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea in an attempt to unify the peninsula under a single communist government. The United States, under President Harry S. Truman, quickly intervened as part of the United Nations coalition, viewing the invasion as a direct threat to the containment of communism during the early Cold War period. The war involved intense and often brutal fighting, featuring both conventional and guerrilla warfare. Early in the conflict, American and South Korean forces were pushed into a smaller defensive perimeter around the city of Busan. In September 1950, General Douglas MacArthur led a daring assault at Incheon, which turned the tide of the war and allowed UN forces to recapture Seoul and push North Korean troops back across the 38th parallel. However, as UN forces advanced toward the Yalu River near the Chinese border, China entered the war with massive troop support for North Korea, leading to a long stalemate.